So, what would happen if you believed wholeheartedly that you were using performance enhancing drugs to help increase your muscle mass, decrease your body fat, increase your strength? And here's the catch: what would happen if you thought you were using it and you weren't using anything at all? You were being given a placebo. Now, when I was younger, I would have said that absolutely nothing would happen. But my first-hand experiences over the years point to a different outcome. And in this video, I'm going to talk about a story about someone who actually did think that they were using steroids and how remarkable their transformation was as a result, all because of the power of suggestion. Stay tuned. So we all know about the placebo effect. We know that pharmaceutical companies use it to their advantage. And we also know that in many cases, when physicians prescribe something, when someone comes into their office and they can't really figure out how to help them, that prescription isn't necessarily supposed to do anything but create a strong placebo effect to make the person feel better. And in a lot of cases, it does work. The question is, how powerful is the placebo effect? Now, a lot of my ideas and philosophies regarding not using supplements at all come from some of my first-hand experiences with the placebo effect and really seeing how powerful suggestion can be. One example, and perhaps an example that is critical to my understanding of how the human mind really works, happened back in Trinidad when I was a teenager. Now, in Trinidad, practical jokes are a staple. The guys in the gym would play practical jokes on each other all the time. It was just something that people did. And sometimes those practical jokes were, I would probably say in retrospect, a little bit out of hand. One such practical joke was played on this one particular guy who, shall we say, for lack of a better word, wasn't the most popular person in the gym, but who constantly talked about wanting to use anabolic steroids. Now, back then, unlike how things are now, anabolic steroids were only available to a closed number of bodybuilders who were kind of in the know. And in order to use steroids, you had to be on good terms with them in order to get access to those drugs. And as a teenager growing up, I had already made the decision I wasn't going to use drugs, but you kind of knew who the ones who had the drugs and the ones who were giving out the drugs, as it wasn't something that was kept a secret. But if you weren't on good terms with them, there was no way whatsoever that you were going to have access to those drugs. And there was also some degree of responsibility on their part as well, in terms of they didn't want to just, sell it to anybody. They really were a little bit conscientious of the fact that what they were selling was something that could have catastrophic side effects if used improperly, and even if used properly, to be very honest. So this one particular guy in the gym, they didn't like him very much, but he was persistent. He would constantly talk about what he would do if only he could get access to drugs. And I was in the locker room when some of the bigger guys were talking about playing this horrible joke on him. Now, the joke was that they were going to give him an injection of water with some alcohol in it, tell him it was steroids, and then have a great laugh afterwards. Now, overhearing this, I felt really badly about what was going to happen. And I would have liked to have stood up there and said, "Y'all can't do this. This is horrible. This is terrible." But at the time, they outnumbered me significantly, and I was nowhere near as large as I am today. And they kind of looked at me because they saw that I heard what was going on with a bit of a look to say, "You better not say anything about what's going on over here." And so I elected to not have anything to do with it whatsoever. But I did see the conversation that he had with some of them. And I saw how enthusiastic he was about the prospect of being able to finally use anabolic steroids. And since he was, shall we say again, not the most discreet of individuals, when he started the injections, he was very vocal about the fact that he had started, and very vocal about the fact that he was on steroids, and very happy that he was on steroids. So this was all, supposed to be this big um, practical joke and laugh. But then something very strange happened. He started getting a little stronger, just a little stronger. Then he started to get a little stronger. And as the weeks went by, and these guys were horrible enough to literally have this guy meet them in the locker room once a week to give him an injection with nothing in it, which right there, the idea of injecting someone in the first place with anything is kind of, makes me cringe. But the fact that they were injecting him with, water and some alcohol so it would burn, because their idea was if it burned, it would make him feel like it was more potent and real. Absolutely terrible. But as the weeks went on, he didn't get a little stronger. He kept on getting stronger to the point where it became noticeable. He was squatting maybe around 225 pounds when he first started. He wasn't that big of a guy. He must have been about 155 pounds or so. About 5'6". And then he started to put weight on. And he put on maybe about 10 to 15 pounds of what looked like muscle. His squat went from 225 to about 350 or so. His bench press, where he was barely bench pressing more than a plate and a little plate and some tens, he was bench pressing easily 245s on each side for repetitions. So he was getting bigger and he was getting stronger, the same way that someone who would be on steroids would. Now, I was training as hard as I could. I was eating perfectly. And my gains were nowhere near what he was experiencing. Nowhere near. So there was no point where we could say that he was just experiencing a growth spurt, a natural growth spurt. He had been training for a couple of years, longer than I had been training, and yet he was really going through this radical transformation, both physically and in terms of his performance. And then I saw him in the locker room while he was posing and showing off his new built muscle. And he had acne all over his back. His upper back was covered with acne. The same way it would be for someone who was using anabolic steroids. He was exhibiting all the outward signs of an anabolic steroid user. So, of course, I thought to myself, well, maybe they put something in those injections and thought nothing of it. Until there was a big confrontation at the gym. The guy who was giving him the injections came up to him on the gym floor and demanded to find out who he was getting steroids from. Now, this guy wasn't too bright, so he looked at him and said, I'm only getting the injections from you. I'm not using anything from anybody else. And he didn't believe him. He said, you must be getting something from somebody else, because how is it possible that you are so much bigger, so much stronger, you have acne all over your back, and we're not giving you anything? So that was a big reveal. That was a big moment where they finally came out and said that they were not giving him actual steroids. And his reaction was really odd. He said that that was impossible, that there was no way that what he was being given wasn't steroids because of his increased performance and the transformations in his body. The guys in the locker room were completely puzzled. They had no idea what the hell was going on. And even when I left Trinidad several years later, he maintained that it wasn't a joke, that they had given him anabolic steroids, whereas those guys, for certain, did not. It was all based on the power of his belief. He believed so completely and wholeheartedly that he was using anabolic steroids to the point where his body changed in an almost unnatural way, as if he was using anabolic steroids. Now, I must have been 15 years old when I witnessed this back in Trinidad. And it made a really sizable impression on me in terms of my own training and my own supplement use. Back then, in the 1980s, early 90s, bodybuilders didn't really talk about their steroid use openly the way they do today. And a lot of them would attribute their fantastic professional level bodybuilding physiques to the supplements that they were using. And I remember there was one that came out, and it was called vanadil sulfate. And vanadil sulfate was supposed to be this next big thing. And back then, there was no internet, there was no bodybuilding.com, there was no YouTube, there was no Instagram, nothing like that. The only real connection that the world had with bodybuilding and bodybuilding information were the magazines. Flex magazine, Muscle Fitness magazine were the main ones. And there was this unfortunate partnership in that the publisher of Flex magazine and Muscle Fitness magazine was the guy, brothers actually, Joe Weider and Ben Weider. And Joe Weider was also in charge of and owned the company that made supplements. And he was also the one who was in charge of and owned the rights to the bodybuilding competitions. So it was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of vested interests and promotion. So all the top bodybuilders would always be praising the merits of the various supplements that the Weeders were producing. And this one supplement, vanadil sulfate, was really over the top in terms of how much they were saying that it was going to be a game changer. Now, For someone like myself, young, impressionable, but also resolved to not use anabolic steroids, I was looking for whatever there was out there that I could take that would not affect my hormones in any way, shape, or form, but help me achieve my goal of becoming a bodybuilder. And back in those days, all we had to rely on was that information and then what we saw from our friends and colleagues in the gym. There were guys in the gym who started using vanadil sulfate and they started making some real changes in their bodies. And they started talking about it, saying, hey, I use vanadil sulfate and my pumps are much more than they were before. My biceps are a little bit bigger than they were. I'm a little stronger. And to the point where it was a little noticeable. You could see that there was something going on. And these were people who I knew for a fact were natural. They were like me. They were not people who were interested in using anabolic steroids, and I trusted their judgment. And so my training partner at the time and I decided we were going to get some vanadil sulfate too. And we used it. And it was fantastic. It was amazing. We had better pumps. We got stronger. We felt fuller. Our lifts went up. Everything they said would happen happened. Until over time, the results kind of petered out. And over time as well, talk of vanadil sulfate kind of faded away. Eventually, when I became obsessed with understanding everything there was to know about supplements, I saw that vanadil sulfate was pretty much debunked as not having any anabolic properties whatsoever, and that it was completely a placebo effect. It was because our friends had used it and claimed to have had some really good results from it, and because we were bombarded by all these articles of some of the top bodybuilders at the time talking about how fantastic it was and how well it worked for them, it was that made us see a change when we used it. But it was all really coming down to the power of our minds and the power of suggestion. Now, as a very science-based person, I'm not a very big believer in placebos from a personal level. But there's something, a bit of pride, that gets in the way sometimes, because the reality is that it has nothing to do with what I believe on a personal level or not. It simply is. Some things exist outside of ourselves. And it was important for me to kind of be humbled and realize that this is a real phenomenon. This isn't a trick being played. This isn't some form of weakness on my part or anyone's part if they find themselves affected by a placebo effect. It's something that requires more investigation, and it's something that we need to keep in mind, especially as a natural athlete or anyone who's trying to improve their body. We need to keep it in mind because what it means is that we need to be very careful when it comes to supplementations and any kind of supplements that come out on the market, because if the power of suggestion, especially today when we have so much more media influence and so much more information and so much more suggestion from people who are fitness celebrities, fitness influencers, and bodybuilders, bikini competitors, and the whole slew of them that people are exposed to on a regular basis, it's really easy when they're the ones hawking some of these supplements to have the perception that they're working when they really aren't doing much of anything. Now, after the vanadilyl sulfate incident, I'll call it, I decided that I was going to start a path where my natural bodybuilding would get to a place where I was not only not using regular supplements like protein powders and such, and just eating regular food. And that's where I am today. I don't believe in supplements. I don't use them. I don't need them. And one of the things that was responsible for that particular shift was the realization that there had been so many more supplements over the years that came and went that people just didn't talk about. Boron, back in the 80s, was supposed to increase testosterone by 500%. Anybody who knows anything about organic chemistry might know that boron is a mineral, and that it obviously doesn't radically increase testosterone. But back in the 80s, those people who were using it and bombarded by all that information saying it did, many of them had positive things to say about it for a while. And then when it stops working, it's not so much people stop and say, hey, I got scammed. Hey, that didn't work. They just move on to the next thing. And it always is the next thing. You know, it was boron, and then it was vanadilyl sulfate, then it was chromium picolinate, then it was ZMA. All these things purporting all these fantastic properties that science and time show to be a bit of an exaggeration of their capabilities. And that most of these substances actually didn't really do much of anything. But because people believed so much in them, that they actually saw a positive effect. Now, the reason why I started thinking about stopping using supplements was something even deeper than that. In that my realization was, if I could take something and because of the belief that it's going to do something for me, that I could actually physically make my body change as a result, that there's a lot of power there. But if I was taking my focus and putting it on something outside of myself, I was losing something. You see, my philosophy is that if it is that a sugar pill or some water with alcohol or some mineral that has absolutely no anabolic properties whatsoever can change our bodies so radically if we believe that they can do these things, that we are underestimating our own potential. We are underestimating how much we can change ourselves with the power of our minds. And that we need to not look outside of ourselves to make that happen. My focus became on believing that I could get bigger, that I could get stronger, that I could, with every single workout, somehow or the other, affect a change in my body by sheer force of will, combined with my training, combined with my diet. My belief to this day in my ability to improve is unshakable. It's unshakable because it's undiluted. It's not diluted by belief in any supplement, any pill, any drug. It's complete belief in myself. And it's worked. I've done a lot. I've come really far. I've been blessed to do so. And what I want to pass on to you is the fact that we all need to stop looking outside of ourselves for the inspiration to perform, to be better, to transform, to achieve excellence. We don't need to look outside of ourselves. Too much in our society is based on taking a pill, looking for something, looking for a solution that is without as opposed to within. Energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. That is a fundamental reality of our universe and of existence in general. And if energy can't be created or destroyed, it's a precious commodity we need to conserve. And we need to conserve and put all of our energy not into whatever new supplement comes out, whatever new testosterone booster, fat burner, or even into anabolic steroids. We need to put that energy into ourselves. We need to believe in ourselves. We need to use that placebo effect and make ourselves believe. We need to tell ourselves, convince ourselves that what we are doing to change our bodies will make our bodies change. I do think that having an attitude and a mindset where you're truly resolute that you are going to have some major changes in conjunction to proper diet and conjunction with proper training makes more of a change than simply training alone. I do believe that. It has to be. But only if you are able to have that real belief in yourself. And so what I want you to come away with from this is the idea of believing in yourself. Don't take that energy and put it into anyone's supplement, anyone's product. Put it into yourself. You can achieve a lot more than you think you can. If that guy could do so much because he believed he was on steroids, what can we do if we believe in ourselves? Thanks so much for listening. Do be sure to like this video, subscribe to this video, because we always have new content coming out. I want to make sure you are first to get it when it comes out. And Excelsior. Keep on striving.